There's primarily two ways that you can add drums into your Mixcraft project. The first is by selecting from the large library of drum loops that we put into Mixcraft. You can do this by clicking Library, select the folder icon to view the drum loops we put on the computer, then expand any of the folders until you reach the library that you want to hear. The green play button will allow you to hear the drum loop. Click the red button to stop hearing the preview. To add the loop to your project, simply drag and drop it into your timeline onto the track that you'd like it to be on. This method has its downside because your project beat per minute may be different than the BPM of the drum loop. If the drum loop BPM doesn't match your project BPM, you might get prompted with a message from Mixcraft asking you if you want to change the tempo of your entire project based off of the tempo of the drum loop. Now, this is of course fine if you do want to change the entire BPM of your project, but chances are I'm adding drums after I've already added other instruments. In that case, I don't want my entire project tempo to be changed because it's going to impact how all of my other tracks play back. If I get the message from Mixcraft asking if I want to change my project tempo, I usually click no and then figure out what I want to do. You can change the playback of the drum loop to a different BPM, but that's not always a viable workaround. For example, I can technically tell Mixcraft to play back any audio region at the same tempo as my project tempo, but if I put an 80 BPM drum loop in my 140 BPM project and tell Mixcraft to play that 80 BPM drum loop at 140 BPM, it's not going to sound even remotely close to the original drum loop that I wanted. If, however, my project tempo is 120 BPM and the drum loop that I'm adding to my timeline is 123 BPM, then I could definitely manipulate the sound to play back at the same tempo as my project without getting much loss. Here's how you could do that. I'm going to go to my drum library in Mixcraft. I'm going to go into the folder for loops between 120 and 128 BPM. I can see that my project tempo is 120, but this loop that I want is 123 BPM. Well, I'm still going to drag it into my project. Here's a message asking me if I want to change the key. So it's listened to the loop and it thinks that it's a different key than it should be. I'm going to click no. I don't want Mixcraft changing anything. I can do everything manually if I need to. Once I click no, I'm going to click once on the loop that's in my timeline. I'm going to then click on the sound tab towards the left. And when use project tempo is selected, it's going to play back that drum loop at the exact tempo that my project is in. If, however, you want this drum loop to play back at the original BPM, which is 123 for whatever reason, you would select time stretch. The second way that we can effectively add drums is through the Strike plugin. Strike is what's known as a MIDI plugin. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, otherwise known as a virtual instrument. Here's how we can pull Strike up in Mixcraft. Locate your MIDI track, which has a blue strip and probably says acoustic piano if you haven't changed the instrument yet. Click the keyboard icon. Type the word Strike into the instrument preset search bar. Click once on Strike 64. First, we need to pick a drum preset. Our drum presets are located on the left and can be expanded by clicking any of these plus signs. You can preview the sound of the drum kit in the preset by holding down your click on the speaker icon next to any of the preset names. Once you've found the preset that you like, double-click on the preset name to load it. You'll know that your preset has been successfully loaded when you can see the preset name at the bottom of the Strike plugin. Drag the Strike plugin over a bit so that we can close the window behind it. Double-click anywhere on the MIDI track inside your timeline to create a MIDI region. Now, each of these notes in this piano roll correlates to these bars in the Strike plugin. Click on a note in the piano roll inside of Mixcraft to see where it lines up in the Strike plugin. If your drum loop won't stop playing, you can stop it by clicking this red button. Once you've found a loop that you like and where it falls on the piano roll, add a MIDI note by clicking this pencil icon, Then click inside the MIDI grid to add the note. I know that I want my song to start with a verse loop. The verse loop that I want from Strike is related to this key in my piano roll. So I'm going to click somewhere on this grid line to add my verse loop. Now I can lengthen or shorten the MIDI note by clicking this play button, which is the selection tool, and then dragging the sides of the MIDI note. When I press the spacebar, I'll hear my drum loop played back. The Strike plugin defaults to latch mode, which is their term for looping. This means that even if the MIDI file ends, it will continue to play the last loop it was playing. If you don't want this, click latch inside of Strike to unselect it. One of the good things about Strike is it's going to automatically play back these drum loops based off of your project tempo. Depending on your workflow, you may not even want to keep the Strike plugin open after you've already added your first note. For myself, once I have an idea of where the verse and bridge and choruses are at, I'll close out of the Strike plugin, and then I'll choose what other loops I want by adding more notes to my MIDI grid, moving them up and down, and listening. The very first thing you need to do in Strike is select a drum preset. Expand the available presets on the left-hand side by clicking the plus sign next to the desired genre. Hold down your click on the speaker icon next to each option to preview how it sounds. Double-click on the desired preset to load it. To tell if you have a drum preset loaded, you can look at the bottom of the plugin. If you see words in this area, then that's the preset that you have loaded. At the top left, we can adjust what rhythm grid Strike uses. To hear how this affects each loop, click on one of the silver keys at the bottom to start playing a loop. Then select any of the available grid options to hear how it sounds. To reset it back to its original form, select off. Sometimes a drum preset sounds great, but the rhythm is far too fast or too slow. You can use the speed dropdown to adjust how fast or slow the rhythm should be. We're not going to go over each knob because you can hover over it and get a brief description of what it does. You can increase the intensity of the drum playback with this slide here, and you can adjust the complexity of the playback with this slide. The red key at the bottom stops the current playback. This is a good thing to keep in mind, especially if you have the latch function enabled. That means you can put a MIDI note on your grid where this red note correlates to the piano roll and stop your playback if it's playing when it's not supposed to. The amber keys mutes a component from the preset. Muting specific components from your preset comes in handy if the preset has too much going on and you want to simplify things. The silver keys are broken out into loops like verse, fills, chorus, and outros. The blue keys represent single sounds in the kit, like a cymbal crash or the hit of a snare drum. Let's talk about how you can customize what you hear in Strike. Click Latch inside of Strike to unselect it. Go to your MIDI grid and put your marker over the note that you want to edit. Now you can edit each individual drum sound in Strike by going to the Editor tab. If you hold down your click on the MIDI note, Strike will show you what the loop consists of. You can mute or solo individual instruments on the left side. To lower or increase the velocity of a note, hold down your click and drag the note up or down. To add a note, click once on the instrument you'd like to edit on the left-hand side, then click the pencil icon at the top right of Strike. Then click on any line that doesn't already have a note. You can change how the note is played by using the Type drop-down or by using the Flam drop-down. To remove a note entirely, click the eraser button at the top right, then click on the note that you want to remove. If you're not sure if you want to erase the note entirely, but want to hear how it sounds without being played, you can click the X icon at the top right, click on the note that you want to mute. To unmute the note, leave the selection on the mute tool and click the note again. To go back to the original Strike screen, select Exit Editor at the bottom left. Now let's look at the Mix tab. Here you can adjust some volume and effect parameters for each instrument in your kit. keep in mind that each instrument is automatically configured to be played through what Strike references as your master. This isn't your master track in Mixcraft, they're just referencing the MIDI track itself as your master. I like to have a lot of control, and sometimes I'll need to mix down individual drum sounds into their own stems. So what I do is I change each routing in chronological order. Starting from the first instrument, I'll change it from master to out 1. The next one I'll select out 2, and so on and so on. The yellow arrow indicates I can collapse this area to finish routing my drum tracks. When you're done, click the yellow arrow again to expand it. Okay, so why did I route all the drum instruments like that? Well, if I go back into Mixcraft and look at my Strike virtual instrument, there's a plus sign now at the bottom of the track name. This means that there are subtracks. Click the plus sign to expand it so you can see all the subtracks. These are all the instruments that we just routed. Now we're not bound by the effects within Strike. We can add any of the Mixcraft plugins to each individual instrument. I could name these the same as they appear in Strike, but usually I just solo each subtrack and create a new name based on what I hear. I closed out of Strike, but to get back into it, I click the keyboard icon on my virtual instrument track, then select Show. The Kit tab lets me adjust each instrument even more. Same with the Style tab. Lastly, I can take any instrument from any other drum kit and add it into my current preset. To do this, click Kits at the top left of Strike. Find the instrument that you want. Unfortunately, there isn't a preview sound option, but I can drag and drop into a blank track or an existing instrument to replace it. Sometimes I'll just let Strike play, and I'll keep replacing an instrument until I find one that I like. If you really like the customizations that you did in Strike, you can save it as a preset so that you can use it in another project down the line. To save your Strike customizations as a preset, click the save icon at the top right of the plugin. Enter a name for the preset, and then click OK. Now, anytime you use Strike in the future on this machine, you can pull up the same settings and sounds by clicking this dropdown up here.